Okay, so the first themed session this morning is that on unnecessary suffering, and I'm sure it's all dear to our hearts as we explore the issues of welfare that impinge on us from day to day. And our first speaker is David Chennells. David is a Cambridge graduate, and David spent most of his career in general practice, with the last 27 years particularly specialising in pig work. They said in the notes, when you read it out, just say he's a big pig man. So that is what he is. He's senior partner of a Bedford practice. And David is former president of the Pig Veterinary Society and currently responsible for Pig Veterinary Society's publications, their higher education programme and CPD. He is a member of the advisory committee of the RSPCA Freedom Foods and veterinary advisor to the technical committee of the Red Tractor and Assured British Pig Scheme. So David is well qualified to talk on what he's going to talk on, which is to load or not to load. And this is quite a common dilemma that we see in large animal farm practice. Is an animal fit to be transported? Is it fit for the intended journey? It's quite a complicated answer, and it's covered by three specific pieces of legislation which encompass on-farm welfare, welfare during transport, and obviously at the slaughterhouse. The legal definitions are not specific, and quite often when things do get taken to court, the decisions that come out of the court are quite often inconsistent, and often opinions given as to fitness can be personal and quite subjective. So this uncertainty undoubtedly results in some of the animals spending far too long in hospital pens on the farm, in sometimes the vain hope that they will recover and allow salvage of the resource of an animal that would otherwise be fit for human consumption. So the big question is, do these animals suffer extended long-term pain whilst they're actually left on farm because of fear of transgressing the legislation by transporting them, when perhaps sympathetic transport and a predefined set of conditions may not cause extra pain, discomfort or distress? So David, over to you.
Well, thank you very much for the introduction. I thought it sounded quite good. I was surprised it was me. It was some years ago was the first time that I actually spoke to AWF, and at that time there's about 30 of us crammed into the top floor of 7 Mansfield Street. So it does show how this forum has developed. And somebody said, come up with something controversial. So this was my idea. There's plenty of pictures so you don't get hit too hard early on. Firstly, we'll have a disclaimer. Any opinions I express will not be AWF policy or BVA policy. They might not even be my policies. This is a discussion forum. This is just ideas thrown at you. So don't be frightened by them and be more than happy to argue with them. The important thing is, before you start, is to make sure you know what good welfare is. And you see this picture here taken on a small client after a torrential rainfall. And we all know what good welfare is. But it's not what your eye sees, it's what the animal, or in this case the pig, tells you. And I don't care what anybody says, but that is a happy pig. So what we're on straight away is dilemma management. And as was said in the introduction, there are 3 separate pieces of legislation covering welfare to consider. Welfare on the farm, welfare during transport, and welfare at slaughter. So initially, just to make the job simple, to make sure you're on the right side of the law, you have to be well versed in 3 different pieces of different aged, non-concurrent legislation. But there is a serious concern amongst farmers about transporting casualty animals. And it's because of the uncertainty and the unpredictability. I'm always asked, when I give talks to farmers, when I meet my clients at meetings like this, I'm always asked, can I send so-and-so and so-and-so? And I always say, I don't know. We've got to make a decision. Remember this, some people won't like this, but it isn't just about money. Salvaging animals to transport them to an abattoir is not just about money. Money comes into it because these guys are commercial. But no stock keeper likes euthanizing animals. They just don't like doing it. It goes against their basic stock keeper instinct. And remember that, because that is the big inhibition for them just to shoot everything. They want to give them a chance to recover. If I had a fiver for every time somebody said, oh, I'll give this one a chance, I probably could have retired years ago, because it's constantly what you hear said. And they don't like the idea of a waste of a life, particularly as they get older. Both the farmers and the pigs come to that. But they say, well, we've worked hard to get to this stage. It seems a shame to kill it when we could salvage it. Because many casualties are otherwise healthy, and there's no definition of healthy, it's just lack of illness, if you like, and they're fit for human consumption. Just notice you're going to see an awful lot of words in apostrophes. So what's the consequence? Where are we? The question is, are far too many animals languishing in hospital pens or treatment pens or recovery pens, whatever you want to call them, for far too long and recovering too slowly with chronic pain and possibly chronic distress? All things very difficult to measure when you're just looking at a pig sitting in straw. And is it because of a fear of the unknown? The unknown being, what would be the outcome if somebody disagrees with my decision? And there you have a pen of recovering pigs. Now, to me, they all look all right. This was on a farm that had a massive, sudden outbreak of tail biting. Loads of tails got bitten right off. The pigs were separated, treated, and recovered. All of those pigs walking on four legs, eating and happy. And before anybody says it, this was on a straw-based unit. So don't say it was because they were kept on slats. This is a straw-based farm, and they had a massive outbreak of tail biting, which I'm more than happy to talk about later. But then you get the others. And these are starting to become long-term residents. And they become long-term residents because it's very difficult for the guys to decide when to stop, particularly when they've started. But what happens if you make the wrong decision? Well, you could end up with 4 vets involved. Your own farm vet, the OV at the slaughterhouse, maybe somebody from the field service of AHVLA gets called in, and possibly somebody from the local authority or the RSPCA or other charities or whatever who might want to get involved. And that's just vets. Then you have all the people who get involved. Then it gets even more complicated because everybody will have their own opinion. And it will always be subjective and it will always be personal. So you start doing the multiplications on this and look how many different opinions you could have when you start multiplying them. And then in the real world, we could have complications because these 4 vets could have been trained in 4 different countries. Each country will have its own standards, its own legislation, its own opinions, its own traditions. I have seen a video or a DVD of an EU member state of a farmer killing a pig by just sticking it in the throat. No stunning, no restraint, they just laid on it and ripped out its jugular veins. And you could even have 4 different first languages when you end up in court. So, the thing is, you can't put your head in the sand, right? Decisions have to be made, like it or not. So what does the legislation tell us? Well, the Welfare of Animals Transport Order says it is an offence to transport any animal in a way which causes or is likely to cause injury or unnecessary suffering to that animal. Well, that's fairly straightforward, so we're fine. We've got a decent piece of legislation. That's based on EU legislation, EC 1/2005. There's 31 articles in that. There are plus 6 amendments. That makes us 37 articles. And Article 3 says, general conditions, transport of animals, no person shall transport an animal or cause animals to be transported in a way likely to cause injury or undue suffering to them. Pretty straightforward. In addition, following conditions. One, to make sure that you've planned it in advance. The length of the journey and the animal's needs. That's fine. And then it says, this great line, the animals are fit for the journey. Great. So now we know. All they have to be is ready and fit. There are 26 definitions in this piece of legislation, A to Z. Now, whether they actually had 26 things they needed to define, or they just wanted to use one for each member, one for each member state, probably, and one for each letter in the alphabet. But there are no definitions of the words fit, unfit, or casualty. So that doesn't help us much anymore, does it? And I just sort of thought of this when it came up in discussion. If unnecessary suffering is illegal, what's necessary suffering? That's Mike's job, isn't it, in a few minutes' time? And just to go back, that's what happens when two boars disagree over their love life. But things do heal by granulation. That's 13 days of natural healing. So when can I load that and take it? And what guidance is there? Because we need guidance. Well, I started looking for guidance, and I was fairly unrewarded. But the 1997, now repealed Transport Act did say similar words to the current legislation. It has to be fit. Okay, that's good. And then it had this, which has disappeared unless it's reappeared somewhere else and I couldn't find it. If you go down to this line, this is classic, without prejudice, generality, this is a lawyer's writing this, the purpose is asked of the animal, except not considered, it's ill, injured, infirm, fatigued, unless it is only slightly injured. Ill, infirm, or fatigued, and the intended journey is not likely to cause it unnecessary suffering. Doesn't say how long or how far, but as long as it's slightly, you're all right. There's no definition of slightly. There are veterinary publications such as Casualty Pig, which the Pig Veterinary Society produces. There's industry training, but they're not official. They're only advice. So it only comes down to opinion. The next thing to remember is that legislation is written by administrators and lawyers. Politicians amend the legislation and not necessary to benefit it. They usually take things out or they put stupid things in. Then they approve it. But it's the courts that interpret it. Not the lawyers, not the politicians, not us. And then when you get to court, you could get the involvement of the allegedly expert witness, and I use the word allegedly deliberately. And then you get in the situation, dare I suggest, that sometimes the expert witness's ego is more important than the animal welfare outcome. And ironically, on Friday, I sat with somebody who had been an expert witness in a case, the neutral expert witness, although he was called by the defence, and his classic words was, "And we won." And I said, "What about the animal?" And he looked at me a bit forlorn and said, "I suppose you've got a point." So, all things are obvious. So we look at a few gruesome pictures, or not so gruesome. It's fairly obvious if an animal has a fairly established disease. It's fairly obvious when an animal can't stand to walk. You have the obvious things where maybe two problems or injuries are there concurrently. So he's got two problems. He's got an abscess on his stifle and probably either a rupture or an infection in the scrotum. And large, sore, open wounds are obvious. So I don't think many of us would contemplate loading these animals. These animals, depending on their stage, would either be euthanized or maybe given a chance. Lameness. How lame is too lame? There is no definition. This fella is on three legs. He's pretty quick when you want to catch him, mind. This fella is almost on three legs, but he can put a little bit of weight on there. He's got a big swelling over here. Sometimes it can be very difficult to tell whether that swelling is actually an optical illusion because of holding the leg up, or how much extra tissue might be, or abscess might be underneath. You get the guy who's quite happily living out in his field. He can't use his foreleg properly, but he's certainly getting around. He's in good body condition. So on the farm, he's moving around okay. You may not like what you see, but he's capable of moving around. And I can assure you they're more than capable of walking around when you want to catch them. And then you have this chap He can walk and take pressure on all 4 legs, but he's got a huge, probably injection abscess, because some people still inject in the wrong place, over his ham. Then you have the tricky old problem of tail biting. And this is a real problem. We have to live with this day in, day out. Doesn't happen a lot, nothing much as much as people think, but you do get sporadic cases. And then you've got an open sore wound. Well, do you just whip him on a lorry with his mates, perhaps with one less badly affected, get rid of him, get him to the abattoir, off the farm, or do you treat him and hang around and wait for it to heal? Or do you spray it in some sort of cosmetic blue paint, which allegedly is an antibiotic treatment? Well, it does about as much good as the rainwater. So it doesn't look quite so bad, and shove him on a lorry and get rid of him, or stick him in a straw yard and come back after a couple of weeks, see if it's healed. They do heal. As you saw in an earlier slide, these things do heal, but they do take time. Then you have the odds and ends of injuries. The guy with the chewed ears, or maybe had an ear tip infection which became necrotic. He's cosmetically not very nice, but he's probably hardly troubled by that. Behaves normally, eats, does all the things that pigs should do. Or other skin lesions. I don't know, this was a picture given to me. I don't know how that pig acquired that skin lesion, but you can see there's mass exfoliation. It's a healing lesion, probably now getting into the advanced granulation stages. And at some stage, somebody has got to decide when that animal's fit to load, or decide it won't get better and shoot it. And just remember, the people who make the decisions got to use the gun. And that makes it harder, because you've then got to walk up, look them in the eye and shoot them, particularly pigs, because you've got to absolutely be in the right place, and they look at you and you look at them. There's a rectal prolapse. It's obviously been out far too long before it was noticed. But the pigs that have these run around in pens, and they are completely unconcerned. They are unbelievably unconcerned by these prolapses. And then the pig that's got a very swollen leg, but can walk on all 4 legs quite happily. So is this cosmetic? Is this painful? Is this good? Is this bad? Or what the heck do we do next? And then the healing injuries. This probably got in a boar fight and got an abscess in his testicle, in the scrotum. It's birthed, it's healing, it's granulating, and you can see he's getting on with his life quite happily. Can I load him? This one doesn't come out too well, but this chap's got a sort of an ulcerated foot, a bit like fouling the foot of cattle, but with a different cause. Could probably walk on the leg okay, but it doesn't look very nice. I wouldn't want to load him. But people ask, can I load him? Do you think this will be all right? And then the congenital deformities, kinky back pigs. These are often born like this, or they get injured, or something happens when they're very young piglets. And so they can't, they don't look very nice, but they can run around. And they grow. And they grow. So they get bigger. And they still have a kinky back. And they run around and they eat and they get better. That's not the greatest of places to live by the looks of it, but they survive. But if you see one of those, should you walk up to this fella and shoot him? Because you say, one day you'll be one of those and I don't want to put you on a lorry. And then we have the tricky thing about established deformities. This is a bent leg. It's a very, very, very bent leg. It was a fracture that got mended, and it all looked absolutely fantastic. We took pictures of it, and when we took it all off, it had mended bent. And this animal is a highly valuable heifer of a prize bull. Highly valuable. We even referred to one of the universities, and they said, ooh. They came and looked at it and said, well, we could break it again and plate it. And I said, I'm not very happy with that. And the farmer wasn't very happy with that. And then the guy who gave the idea said, I'm not very happy with that either, actually. He said, I think I'd leave that. So there's this animal. There's more views. You can see It takes weight on it, it walks on it, but it is very bent. You can see. Now, what do we do with that? What do we do with it? Do we shoot it? If it didn't have a bent leg, it's probably worth £20,000. It's still worth £20,000 as an embryo donor with a bent leg. And catch me if you can. I took those pictures only last week, and it was quite difficult to keep her still enough to take the pictures because she was running around the pen, trotting up and down. You can lead walk it, you can do everything. And then the next question we get, I'm nearly finished. What size rupture is acceptable? Because how big an umbilical rupture or hernia can we load? They're always asking me that question. So is that one okay? Or maybe a bit bigger? Or maybe a bit bigger still? Or maybe a massive scrotal hernia rupture? The pig, I can assure you, apart from a slight incapacity at walking, is completely unconcerned by that, totally. Right? And if it was a Holstein cow, they'd have an udder twice as big as that to walk round. Not the best of pictures, but if they ulcerate and start to open, then we can say, no, don't load that because that might burst in the lorry. They often don't, of course. So have we got it right? Or, if we actually transported these animals with care, properly, plenty of straw, singly penned, small wagon, would we actually cause them less discomfort to load them, get them away, rather than wait and wait and wait, maybe a bit too long for them to get better? And certainly, because there is no rules, so it's opinion here, we could go for a show of hands, I won't, right? If you've got an animal that's running around on 3 legs and you can't catch it, do you think it's okay then to load it? Just a question. So, thank you very much, and we'll let the jury decide. Thank you very much. And a round to time. How about that?
9 seconds. Gentleman over there.
Andrew Scott, past chairman AWF. My comments would be, I've been in court, I've been asked to give certificates, I've been all around this problem, which David has described so well. I think there isn't an answer to any of these questions apart from hoping you've not stepped out of the line too far. I think David Cameron's recent promise to make sure we have local abattoirs is one of the things that we're really missing. We have 2 small abattoirs in our area. I know the OVs very well, and usually the farmer speaks to me, I speak to the OV, the animal goes to the slaughterhouse. Usually quickly. If you haven't got that happy relationship, or you've got a meat production plant or whatever, then you're in trouble. The other comment I think that's important from the professional point of view is that if you find yourself in court, in whatever capacity, remember, unless you're defending yourself, remember you're there as an advisor to the court. Whichever side you appear for is irrelevant. You're there to advise the court with a veterinary opinion. I won't say expert because David's already demolished that. But I think if you remember that you're there to help the court rather than either side, then you'll come out each time a very much happier man. But these problems, I did a lot of sheep export work during the exports to France, etc. And the problems we had there are exactly the same as these pigs. You have to make sure animals are fit to travel. You then have to deal, I mean, if you're looking at 2,000 lambs, you've then got to deal with these lambs that nobody's interested in. Where are they going to go? So I think David's outlined a perfect problem to which there are probably a myriad of answers.
Just to answer that, I'll answer that with 2 comments as I've got the opportunity. I was involved in a court case last year, and the expert witness for the defence, and the case was not proven, it was based on identity and not based on the facts, but the expert witness that appeared for the defence, and it was a pig case, had not set foot on a pig farm for 12 years. And yet, the person involved called themselves an expert witness and was accepted by the court as an expert witness. And the other comment about sheep and lameness, I always think of this too. If you're a big sheep farmer and you send 100 lambs to the abattoir every week for a year, and on every lorry there's 2 lame lambs, nobody would even bat an eyelid, nobody would comment. But if you put 100 lame lambs on one lorry 1 week during the year, and for the other 51 no lame lambs, they'd throw the book at you. And that is the inconsistencies that we have to live with, and they are there constantly.
Yeah, I think it's right. We do a bit of expert work within the practice, and it's amazing reading some of the case notes how polarised expert views can be when they're acting for both the defence and the prosecution.
Lady in the middle.
I think we've got Andrew.
Okay, sorry, Andrew Vose from Scottish Government. I'd just like to take issue slightly with you saying there's no guidance in the legislation on fitness. If you look at Regulation number 1, 2005, it's an EC regulation, so it applies to all member states directly. That actually has a section in the annex on what is considered fit for transport. And that includes animals that are able to walk unassisted, animals presenting a severe wound or prolapse, so it defines those as unfit. It also does make this allowance that sick or injured animals may be considered fit for transport if they're slightly injured. But the important test is that transport would not cause additional suffering, and in cases of doubt, veterinary advice shall be sought. So the dilemma, I take it, it still obviously is, it's for the vet to decide, will transport cause unnecessary suffering in these cases? But there is guidance there if you look for it in the regulation.
Yes, it's quite difficult to find, actually. I'm interested you said that because we were scouring. I've got 2 people on scouring the legislation, doing word searches and things, and it doesn't come up very easily. But
yeah, I should have asked the government veterinary advisor.
I should.
I think it's very difficult. It's the grey scale, isn't it, that's in the middle, ends of the spectrum of fine and what have you. But we have another question here in the middle.
Hello, I'm Amy Bostock, just a regular veterinary surgeon. I'm also a vegan. I stopped eating pigs in university. But my question is, if the issue is transportation, because basically that's the issue, why after so long are we still transporting animals at all? Why have we not figured out a way to slaughter them where they are? Why does the abattoir not come to the animal? I'm sure that there must be enough technology these days that we can get something designed, some sort of transport system. So, that's my question, really. Maybe I'm dreaming, but...
Do you know, I knew there would be somebody who was a vegan who would ask me a question about this, and the answer to your question is I don't think in any practical way that would be possible. And the only way I can answer that is to talk about scale, because we get the same questions, well, what about these small farmers and niche markets and local abattoirs? And my answer to that is always the same. I have a client who's got his own butcher's shop, and the abattoir is just round the corner. So everything is very local, which is good, very little transport. And he kills between 3 and 5 pigs a week for his local butcher's shop. Whilst we sit here today, Morrison's alone will kill 5,000 pigs in their 2 big abattoirs. And when you see the scale of that and the speed at which those pigs go down the line, which is about 1 pig every 10 seconds, there is no practical way that it would be done other than centrally in large abattoirs. So I think, regardless of how nice the idea is that you wouldn't transport animals, in practicalities it won't happen. And some friends of mine went on a trip to China, and they came across an abattoir that was killing 1,200 pigs an hour on 3 parallel lines. And that is almost the speed of chicken abattoirs. So when you talk about the volume, or consider the volume, that is only going to be the way it's going to work. And so the answer is to make sure that when we do transport animals, we do it properly and do it with consideration.
I've got plenty of hands going up now. Do you want to take one near to the back there?
Hi, Matthew Erskine, just Edinburgh veterinary student. You talked a lot in the presentation about animals being fairly unconcerned by whatever the ailment was, but is there not a rationale to say that the behaviour of these animals is not a good judge of whether to transport them? To take an example of a small animal client that comes in with a dog that's mildly limping on a leg or something that turns out to be an osteosarc, everyone would probably accept that the dog is in fairly considerable pain, and would that not be a similar situation in these farm animals, that they could be in considerable pain, but because they're continuing their natural behaviour, you accept them therefore to be fit for transport? I'm not sure that that's a kind of plausible kind of argument.
I totally agree with you, and the thing is, we don't really know. You can see the animals appearing to behave normally, and certainly one of the bits of guidance that is in legislation is that I can't remember the exact words, but basically you should never use undue coercion to load an animal, because I think if an animal's reluctant to move, then it's probably feeling some form of discomfort that means it doesn't want to be loaded. I think it's impossible to know, because then their basic instinct is to eat, so they'll always eat. And I knew somebody who was a vet in the Second World War, and he said that he'd seen horses that had been hit by various bits of low-flying metal, with legs chopped off and big holes in their side, happily, with a small h, standing next to the hay, chewing away on the food. It's a natural instinct. And so you can't really measure what they're feeling. But when you look at a lot of these animals, you walk in the pen, they run around, you don't hear squealing, you don't see them take a few steps like a lame dog and sort of stop and hold their foot up. Sometimes you do, and you think, right, well, whatever happens, that one's not going. But I think this is part of the dilemma. And in your opinion, you may see something and say, well, I think that animal's in pain, and somebody else will look at it and say, well, to me, it's running around okay. And what you don't know is the ones that you have no suspicion have got anything wrong with them, but they still might be in pain from infections in the foot, from previous historical damage to joints. You never know. It's exactly the same. We were watching could get myself in trouble now, but we were watching the badminton 3-day event on Saturday afternoon and yesterday afternoon, and there was horses there giving some of those fences one hell of a clout, but they kept going. They kept going. Now, is that the adrenaline, is it the enthusiasm, or is it, the rugby player syndrome? You don't feel any pain until the fun stops. And then when the fun stops, all of a sudden, knees start hurting and legs start hurting and headaches come on. Who knows? It's you trot the horse up after it's been around the cross country and it looks fine, and 2 hours later it's got a bit of a lift. So yours is a very valid point. You're encompassing what the problem is. We don't know. We haven't got a measure of it. It's very difficult, but exactly the same. We see animals brought in, small animals brought into our veterinary surgery, and you think, God, poor thing, how could they brought that in? But it happens.
I think we're in danger of setting the hairs running here, and we're certainly getting some topics for next year's discussion. I've got a lot of hands going up. Lewis, you've had your hand up, and there's a gentleman next to you as well. And then we've got Kat, Jane, and I think there's a lady in the middle.
Are you watching the time?
You've got 5 minutes, so brief as you can, please.
Graham Duncanson, practitioner from representing the Eastern Counties. I would take you to task, David, that we do know. I think we as humans know that things hurt, and these animals are disguising it because they are animals that are preyed on, and pigs are no different from cattle in that respect. They have enemies. We do know, but we are choosing to decide, and as you so rightly explained, that there's very very unwise definitions in the legislation. But I think as a welfare foundation, we ought to admit that any animal that's lame is suffering to some degree. There is pain there.
Yeah, I'll gladly accept that comment and criticism. I think that the difficulty is, and part of the pretext for this presentation was they won't not be in pain because they're not loaded. You know, I'm more concerned about the animals that are shoved into hospital pens and almost forgotten about because people are frightened to make decisions. You know, if the legislation said, boom, you cannot load anything that might have pain, then that makes it easy. You just shoot a lot of animals. And that's why I just introduced, which I'm sure Mike will have a go at, this concept of if we are defining some suffering as unnecessary, that means that we are complicit, like it or not, in accepting that some suffering is necessary, whether the word necessary is right, or acceptable. We all accept some level of acceptable pain and suffering. We don't treat humans with broken legs on the side of the road. We put them in an ambulance and move them. And if ever you've seen anybody who's been moved with they have a lot of pain relief, they have a lot of restraint, and they're very gently handled. But I can assure you, I've heard people screaming and crying in pain when they've been loaded into an ambulance. So there's always going to be a compromise, whatever we do. But what you say is absolutely right. But some of those animals might be suffering because they're shoved, because this is one of the biggest faults that I see, is you get animals of all different shapes and sizes with different conditions shoved in hospital or treatment pens. And the small one in there is going to be suffering social stress, if nothing else. And if you've got a swollen leg and you feel damn rough, and you're in there with two big recovering pigs that are jumping over the top of you all the while, that's far worse than anything you'll ever do in a lorry, in my opinion. But it's very, very difficult territory.
Sorry, David.
The deeper you dig, the more difficult it becomes.
Lewis Grant, I'm the VPHA AWF representative, but also I have been a practitioner for many years, and I've also seen life on the other side of the fence as an OV for many years, and then working for the Food Standards Agency, eventually looking at some of the guidance that we would give to our people in the field. I have also been involved in several welfare cases that went to court, and also other issues that could be resolved as an OV with the farmer and indeed his vet. What I really think is that you've got to look at cases. I agree with a lot of what you've been saying about the common sense here, but what I would find is cases, I was not a cruel OV or anything like that with a sort of vendetta against the farmer, not at all. But some of the farmers, took the Michael, as you might say. You may give them fair warning, but they would still shove a few pigs in with 30 or 40 others in a pen in a lorry where it's totally inappropriate, and then they get handballed off the lorry and all sorts of things. Now that is not the farmer doing his best. If he was seeking veterinary advice, I don't think his vet would have said, hey, that's a great idea. I've also seen in court taking people to court where animals have been transported the length of the country when they're obviously been unfit before they've been loaded. And that's the sort of thing that as vets we should be making sure doesn't happen. And I would suggest, and it does say in the BC VA cattle book about emergency slaughter, etc., for goodness sake, as a vet, if you're in any doubt, talk to the guy at the abattoir, discuss it, and decide what is common sense at the end of the day. And I think we'd get on a lot better.
Well, I totally agree with you. I mean, that's always been our policy with our clients. And over the years, we've never had an incident, if you see what I mean. We've never presented the abattoir with anything they weren't expecting to get, whether that's cattle, sheep, or pigs. And that's been done by liaison. You phone up, speak to the OV and say, this is the situation, are you happy with this? And the other thing that you have that's my alarm going off. The other situation you have, there is an intermediate arbiter now, because the offence of transporting the animal that is deemed unfit is the lorry driver's offence. And so the lorry drivers are very, very good arbiters. But the thing that concerns me is people will say, oh, don't take that to Morrison's, but you can take it to so-and-so. And that is constantly, and you speak to farmers, say, oh, we won't send those to the big abattoir, we'll send that to the one around the corner. Now, you could argue that's good because it's going to the nearest local abattoir that will take it. But a lot of it is based on impression at the other end. And the more and more you look into this, the more grey areas and the more woolliness is. And I think in the end that we've all got to try and do the best. And certainly, we have meetings with pig producers on this, and the question, the title of the presentations is usually, can I send this? Or what should I do? And I'm very grateful to Annie Davis of the George Veterinary Group, because a lot of these pictures that I use came from their presentation they do for farmers, which is called Treat, Shoot or Load. And and they have discussions on individual cases to try and get a consistency and to get a care. The guys, without any shadow of a doubt, leave the rogues out of it. There'll always be rogues. There'll always be rogues, and they're the people who should be targeted. But the majority of producers or farmers, they actually want to do what they think is best. And they are the ones that will take advice. And there is a lot of use of captive bolts on farms. There's a lot, there is quite a high level of discrimination about the things that are not going to get better. And they are getting better at it. My father was a sheep farmer, and 40 years ago, if it was still breathing when it got to the abattoir, that was acceptable. And that was acceptable to everybody. And that's the way it was. But things have moved on. So we have made some progress, and I think John wants me to stop.
Yeah, I'm so sorry. I'm going to have to draw a line under this. I'm going to get into so much trouble if we start off the day by being 5 or 10 minutes late. But it just shows the depth of feeling on it. And if we manage to just have another 5 minutes or 10 minutes at the end of the 3 presentations this morning, then we will revisit this. So just keep the questions in your mind. But thank you, David, for an excellent presentation.